tiek akademinio pasaulio, tiek labai daug įsijungęs į įvairias, žodžiu, praktinės veiklas ir praktiškai visą savo gyvenimą yra paskyręs, temai, kuri tokio britiškam variante yra Sport for Development. Ir tikrai man asmeniškai labai daug neteko dirbti su Stephenu, bet aš esu tikra, kad jo ilgametė patirtis ir tam tikri požiūriai į, vėlgi plačiaja prasme, fizinį aktyvumą tikrai praturtins jūsų žinojimą šiandien dienai. Tai aš baigiu savo trumpą pristatymą ir įvadą ir perduodu žodį. So, Stephen, thank you very much for coming to Lithuania. I know that this is not your first time, and I do hope that this is not the last one. So I am very, very happy to have you here today with a great topic of the power of sport in a very general and broad sense. But I am sure that you will focus us to a physical activity level, not top elite sport professional one, but that one from the grassroots perspective. So thank you very much, and we would probably work like that. Steve, he prepared some material for us let it go, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And after, we would like to have the interactive discussion and answering to your questions and some other questions if they might appear. And I will put my comments as well. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Vilma, and hello, everybody. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be here in Vilnius today. As Vilma said, it's my second visit. This time I'm hoping to see a little bit more of the city than I did first time because we were extremely busy. I'm just going to share my screen, and I have prepared a lot of slides with me. I'm not going to use all of them because that would be quite ridiculous, but I took Vilma's challenge of looking at the power of sport, and I've put a question mark. Hoping to do today is give you guys some questions that you can ask about your own practice when it comes to whether sport is always the answer to the problems that we have in society. And later on, I know you've got some questions about physical activity, I have some other material I can show you just to fuel that discussion as well. First of all, I'll record, thanks to my colleague, Dr. Dan Bates. I used to work with him. And some of this material that you're going to see Dan and I prepared together. Just very quickly, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, if I can get the slide to move on. So I call myself Stephen. Lots of my friends call me Steve, which is a very English way to shorten Stephen. I come from a place in the UK called Middlesbrough, which is in the northeast. What you can see there is a picture I took recently of our magnificent football stadium. My team is trying to get promoted to the Premier League at the moment, probably without much success, but we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. And our stadium in Middlesbrough, it's a really important community facility, actually, and service that the football club provides. And we will maybe come to that in terms of the power of sport. So there are 30,000 people there to watch a soccer game, but actually the club has a very strong community foundation using the idea that sport can make a difference to people's lives. Now, I've been trying to make a difference to people's lives, as you can see, for a very long time. I worked in my local municipality in Middlesbrough for 9 years as a sport development officer, so I was working in communities in some of the challenging and deprived areas of Middlesbrough, trying to inspire people to be physically active. And for over a quarter of a century, 25 plus years, I worked at Leeds Beckett University. Leeds is 100 kilometres from Middlesbrough, so I did a lot of driving, listened to a lot of podcasts. I'm now semi-retired, but I've also done lots of sport coaching in the community in table tennis, football, cricket, which is a sport that you guys probably don't know a huge amount about, but I'm very passionate about. So that's a little bit about my background. So keep in mind that, I've used a picture there of our local soccer club and the idea that institutions like that can use sport as a powerful tool. This next slide has a lot of text on it, and I don't need you to read all of it. This is just a statement from the United Nations, and it's just to say this was when the Sustainable Development Goals were launched 11 years ago. This is just to say that there are many, many problems in the world, and lots of them are to do with climate and the environment, or they're to do with poverty, or they're to do with gender inequality and those kinds of things. And we often talk about how we can use sport in order to fix or to address those problems. They're massive problems that we face as a society. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is whether or not sport is the best way to do this, and whether our attempts to use sport are actually going in the right direction. But this slide is just to set the scene that we have a lot of problems to try and tackle as a society. So let's just pick out a couple of things here. Now, this I think is interesting. This is a sport for development intervention. I'm going to talk a little bit about sport for development. This is a project called Peace Players, and they have branches in what example is from Cyprus. They look at conflict resolution and peace through sport. So when I see that, you may be involved in projects like this, or you might be aware of projects that are similar to this. If we don't ask critical questions about, is sport really the best way to achieve these outcomes, or are we using sport appropriately to achieve these outcomes, then we aren't doing our jobs properly. Peace Players is an amazing charity. In Cyprus, there's a link, I can share these slides later on. Many of you will know, and I know that Vilma, you visited Cyprus recently. Cyprus is a divided society. You have people of Greek origin and people of Turkish origin, and the capital city has a wall running through the middle of it to divide people. And what Peace Players is interested in doing is saying, can we use, in the example here, basketball as a way to bring people together? They have a project in Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom, where many of you may be aware that we've had historical problems there, which were caused originally by the British colonisation of Ireland, the British occupation. And now you have sectarian violence, you have a divided society. Peace Players is trying to use sport to bring young people together, get them communicating with each other, get them collaborating with each other, and hopefully starting to address some of the problems of conflict. But in a situation like this, and this is why I put a question mark next to the power of sport, I want us to think about questions like, what assumptions are they making about the power of sport? What is it about sport which is different to anything else we could get people to do? We could get them to do sculpture together. We could get them to do dance. We could get them to do other forms of art or writing. Why is sport uniquely powerful? If we don't ask that question, then we're missing some connections that we could be making. Could other forms of intervention, like the ones I just listed, make more of a difference? Because we have to be honest about this. We love sport. I adore sport. I'm obsessed with it. But we have to ask these questions. And how does a program like this, and this is, I think, the most important question that I'm going to put to you today, how does a program like Peace Players address the underlying causes of conflict and unrest? So if somebody keeps reporting to the hospital or to the doctor with the same illness, and the doctor gives them a cream to fix it or a tablet they can take, but we don't address the causes, that person is going to keep returning to the doctor for more treatment, because we haven't actually done anything about why we have this divide in a society like Cyprus or Northern Ireland or wherever else they are in the world. So it's a very interesting example. There are thousands of examples that have worked like this all around the world. And I'll talk about a few others if you want me to a little bit later on. But we just need to ask some of these questions about what assumptions are we making about the power of sport. When we talk about sport for development, we're talking about the intentional use of sport to make a difference in some form, whether it's peace building goals, it's other development goals, and so on. It could be gender empowerment, health promotion, peace and conflict, lots of other things. So we are intentionally saying to the world, we think sport has the power to address these very, very difficult social issues. And are we talking about organised sport all the time? Because we could be talking about soccer, basketball, cricket and rugby are two sports that are less popular in your country, obviously, but tennis, anything else that you can think of. And we might also be talking about less traditional organised activities, like, and the examples there, parkour, capoeira, the Brazilian martial art. It could be indigenous games, depending on the country that we're dealing with. And then there's an example, which I won't click on just for time considerations, but you might have a look later. World Bicycle Relief. This is a project which has issued over 1 million bicycles to people in what we call the developing world. And it's getting people moving. It's connected to sport and physical activity, but it's partly so that people can get clean, safe water, or that young people can get to school and get an education in parts of the world where we don't have the infrastructure that we do in countries like Lithuania and the United Kingdom. Is that sport for development? Is that what we mean? And is that the power of physical activity, the power of movement being harnessed in some way? You'll have seen some of these quotations. They'll have been translated into Lithuanian, I'm sure. Ban Ki-moon, former United Nations Secretary General, making a very specific link to the old Millennium Development Goals, talking about how sport needs to be included in development and peace programs in a more systematic way. So there's a former United Nations Secretary General telling us that sport is really, really important. This is the most famous quote of all to do with the power of sport. Nelson Mandela, who's in the picture in the background, if you can see it. Sport has the power to change the world, the power to inspire, the power to unite people. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Now, I think we've got a question about youth and physical activity later on. Does it? I mean, huge respect to Nelson Mandela. He's a great towering figure in history, but he's making 4 very, very specific claims there for the power of sport. Excuse me. And a special advisor to the Secretary General on Sport for Development and Peace, which was a post that existed for a time in the United Nations. Sport builds bridges between individuals and across communities, providing a fertile ground for sowing the seeds of development and peace. They are very, very big statements, and I'm behind them. I'm right there. I'm inspired. I think sport is capable of doing miracles, but we have to get it under the skin of what is actually happening when we're using sport in these contexts. I'm not going to stay on this one. This is just further claims by the United Nations. Some of you will have seen this previously. Again, big claims. All of the different things that sport can do: enhance education, foster social inclusion, empower people. That's a very specific word, empower. Give power to people through sport. So these are the claims that we're looking at. So here's the part where I'm going to be a little bit skeptical. And this is just because I worked in an academic institution for many years, as Vilma has done, and this is our job, to be a little bit questioning about some of these assumptions that we're making. A guy called Jay Coakley, an American academic who's written lots in this area, says that the character building power of sport, that our ideas around that are simplistic, that we're sometimes too quick to say, yes, sport is the answer. That we have to actually interrogate it more deeply. There are inequities or inequalities in power in sport and in sport for development. Power is a concept that you have to think about all the time when you're trying to work in your communities. Who holds the power? Whose voice, whose perspective are we actually listening to? So we can't just be, this is an English word that I hope will translate well, we can't just be evangelistic about sport, like a preacher telling people to believe in something that they can't see. We have to be a little bit more critical than that. We need critical and theoretically informed reflection. I think there's a question about in evidence-based practice and policy coming up later. So that this is just, this is academics typically being very academic about this, but at least getting us to ask good questions. And sport is positioned as apolitical. And if we were all in a room today together, I would ask you guys to look at whether sport and politics should or shouldn't mix. And the answer is they do mix, whether you like it or not. They are intrinsically intertwined with each other. But Darnell tells us that sport is understood to have universal meaning to all people, but culture is really important. And this applies to whether you're working in Vilnius or Kaunas or other parts of Lithuania. The local culture and the way people respond to stimuli is important. So if we romanticize sport too much, think about it as being apolitical and disconnected from all of the other political matters that we have to deal with, that's a very misguided way to look at things. So that's the other side of the coin, really. You know this. I'm not going to talk to you about the Sustainable Development Goals. I just wanted to put this on the screen to say we have to, if we decide that we want to look at Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which has something like 15 individual targets attached to it, we have to really look at what we're using sport for in order to reduce inequalities or in order to tackle climate action. I have a friend in India who's been involved in some incredible work using table tennis to tackle climate issues. It can be done, but we have to be critical and we have to be systematic about how we look at it. So I think we've really talked about some of these things already. Just that last point, really, sport is like eating green vegetables. When I was growing up as a kid in the 1970s, adults used to say, eat your greens, so there'd be cabbage or broccoli on the plate. I didn't like the taste of it. Just eat it, it's good for you. And if we're too simplistic in our kind of assumptions about sport, we're in that territory of just saying, just have faith, regardless of whether we're doing the right thing or not. So here are some key points, and I don't know how we're doing for time. I can go on.
It's okay.
Yeah, we're all ready for the time.
No, it's okay.
I'm going to take some questions from people in a few minutes. Here are some things that I think are good principles to be thinking about when you're working in communities, and it's whether you're trying just to encourage people to be physically active so that they can gain the physical and mental and social benefits of being physically active in general, or whether you're trying to use sport to engage young people, divert them from crime, improve education, or so on. The second point there says that interventions need to be co-produced. That means that it's not just somebody who thinks they know everything telling other people what to do. We work together with communities. And, my example of Middlesbrough Football Club earlier, my local football team, works in the community through its community foundation with local young people, and they develop ideas and develop programs together, because the only person who understands my lived experience is me. So I need to share my experiences with you for you to be able to cater for me using sport. So that links to the next point about bottom-up provision. What we should be looking to do to get the power of sport, to get the benefits of the power of sport, is enabling communities to take control over the development process themselves. To some extent, that might be by providing people with training and qualifications and resources in the community. So it's not just top down. It's not just us going into the community and saying, hey, everybody, let's play tennis, badminton, basketball, whatever it might be. The expertise is there in the community as well, because they are the people who know what it's like to live their lives. And the key to this, and this goes back to the peace players example I showed you earlier, is to grasp the workings of power. Who holds the power and who should hold the power if we're going to make positive change in our communities? That's a very, very important word that we can return to if we need to. Now, I'll just summarise this section. I think I'll stop there then, and then if anybody wants to ask a question, I have lots of other things I can show you, but I think it's good to get the dialogue going. So Fred Coulter, who's a friend of mine, who's a professor in the UK, who's from Northern Ireland, actually, a place I mentioned earlier. Sport can have a positive role to play in addressing social cohesion, but you're probably going to have to do it differently. community development and sport development resources. So community development, you know, sometimes we can bring people into this field that don't have any sporting qualifications, but we can use their community development knowledge to help engage young people. And I think we might have a question about that we can delve into a little bit more deeply. And if sport practitioners are serious about development, they have to define what development is. We use the phrase sport development or sport for development all the time. I've been very guilty of this. What do we actually mean when we talk about development? And therefore, we work out what those development goals are and we can construct programs accordingly. But we need to know what we mean by development. And I will just show that this is a summary of the kinds of things that we have been talking about. It's a, you know, just to give us a sort of reference point. It's these and lots of other objectives that we're trying to achieve through sport. How do we know what is development, and when and how do we know it has occurred? These are some of the critical questions we need to ask so that we can genuinely harness the power of sport. I will stop there. That was that was a lot, but I think you get the main idea coming from that. And I know we've got a few questions that we can maybe connect back to some of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so time flew very. I just noticed that it's 20 minutes, but I was so focused. I mean, I'm ready to continue listening, you know, because it is so fulfilling. Okay, so yeah, what language do we use?
English.
English?
Yeah, if somebody else.
Lithuanian isn't very good at all, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But people can ask questions in Lithuanian and
Yes, for sure. But in order to initiate for some questions, could be better probably to switch to Lithuanian. But at the same time, you know, yeah, we have one hand, Monica, our staff member from the agency. Please, Monica, welcome.
Hello, thank you, Stephen, for a nice presentation. From what you have talked about, I have some question. If you could give some thoughts about the role of governmental or municipalities organizations in the promotion of physical activity in society. And would you agree with the statement that the more intensive interventions from the state organizations, the more active society?
Thank you for the question. And
somehow we are switching to a physical activity.
That's okay.
Yeah, somehow. But what you mentioned, you know, well, development, power, sport, and the role of the community. I think this is really something, and that you know, the approach from bottom to the up. Yeah, so it's like, from the one hand, it sounds that it's very general, but when we speak concrete about physical activity, this is the way how we should approach. Yes.
Yeah. So I've just put something on the screen. I did a workshop recently for Durham University in the UK, which is about 45 kilometers from where I live, and I showed this slide to the students just to kind of show, in the UK, the jumble, the confusion of different organisations that we have working in physical activity and sport. And some of these organisations are in the kind of sport for development space that we just talked about. Some are in the physical activity space. I'll quickly highlight a couple of them because I think it's interesting. I'll pick my favourite colour, which is green. So the Department for Culture, Media and Sport is our governmental agency. Well, it's a government department, so it's run by the government of the day. We have a Labour government in the UK at the minute, and our Prime Minister is Sir Keir Starmer. You will possibly know his name. And that department sits at the top of the structure. Much of the funding for physical activity and sport initiatives in the UK comes through our national lottery, and the money is channeled through that department, and then they will send it out to other agencies. Now, some of the agencies on the screen are also charities, and they will raise money through other means. So at the very, very top level, the government itself doesn't have hands-on interventions that are branded as the UK government, but everything is kind of coordinated from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And then you have a body called Sport England. You can see the logo anyway. I can't find my little... There we are. So Sport England here is the body which is responsible for the promotion of sport, physical activity and movement in general in the UK. We also have UK Sport, which isn't on that screen, but is the body which works with athletes, uses lottery money to develop our elite athletes. So Sport England has a coordinating role across all of England. Now, there's a similar body in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, because as you know, we're comprised of 4 different countries, which is very confusing. Sport England coordinates the work of the active partnerships. So there's one of these in pretty much every county. So England is divided into counties. There's an active partnership in pretty much every county whose job it is in general to strategically steer the work. So I used to work with an active partnership called Yorkshire Sport Foundation, and in the Yorkshire Sport Foundation area, there are about 3 million citizens that live in Leeds and Bradford and some Sheffield, other big cities that you may have heard of in the UK. So we've got these different layers. Now, active partnerships are funded by the National Lottery. But then you have all of these other agencies. So street games, down, I've lost the cursor again, down in the bottom, I've lost where I am on the screen now. There I am.
Yeah.
This is a charity which receives government funding, but also fundraises separately. And they have what's called a doorstep sport model. So their job is to work with local agencies. So they will pass on funding to small local agencies using a doorstep sport model, which means they work with local young people, find out what the local young people are interested in, and try to provide stuff which is catered at that local level. So something in Leeds might be something very different to what you see in Manchester, might be different to what you might see in Birmingham and our other big cities. So I'm getting to answer the question. I don't know whether having hands-on provision from the very top, from central government, is the best way to inspire physical activity, because in the towns and cities across Lithuania, the needs are different at each level. And so whether it's the local municipality, and the municipality for Durham is actually represented by this logo here, which is their active partnership, which also works with the municipality, and they all work differently, which is also confusing, but they are working in a hands-on way at local level to try and do things which are relevant to that area and to the needs of the people of that area. So I guess the really long answer to your question is, I would like to see central government making sure that these things have the resources that they need, but having a system in place which allows local good quality decisions to be made, and that's involving municipalities, charities, voluntary sector organisations, and most importantly, the local people themselves, giving them resources to do what's right in terms of promoting physical activity or using the power of sport. Sorry, that was a very long answer, but I hope that helps.
Very comprehensive.
Thank you.
Sharing your UK, situation and putting all clearness in the how the system works in fact. So the role of municipality, or the role of municipality, so somehow from the one hand the central government should hear the voice and the needs of the local municipality. On the other hand, local municipalities, they are a power themselves, to organize resources according to the needs of the population.
Ideally, in the UK, the issue for us is that local councils, as we call them, or local governments, municipalities, have had their resources dramatically cut in the last 15 to 20
Why?
years.
Why?
Well, there was a program of austerity in the UK with a government that sat from 2010 to 2015. They told us that there was no money left. It was after the global stock market crash,
Okay.
and they told us that we had to that public funding was going to be cut across all areas, and lots of really good work that the previous government had done to help young, very small children get a good start in life and so on was cut back or was removed. So local authorities, municipalities have a lot less power than they used to. I worked in local municipality in the 1990s. We had lots of money to spend on local programs. You could make mistakes. You could try things that didn't work and then go back and say, okay, well, we need to do this differently. Now the finances are very tight. So I'm saying I do agree that municipalities should have the resources and should have the power to coordinate activity in their area, work with the community to provide the best opportunities in physical activity. In the UK, though, that is very, very challenging for most municipalities.
At the moment. Okay, so do we have any other questions from the audience? So would you like to add some material on physical activity?
Yeah, I'll show you the physical activity situation in England, specifically England, but it's similar across the rest of the United Kingdom. So in terms of who's participating, and these are the challenges that we face, and we'll think about how this relates to your situation in Lithuania. So I've been working in sport and physical activity since 1989, and I know you're looking in the screen and you're thinking he doesn't look old enough, but trust me, I really am. I've been working since 1989 in this field, and we started measuring physical activity participation in the UK in the early 1990s, and different methods have been used to measure down the years. This is what we now have, which is an active lives adult survey that is done by the agency I introduced earlier, Sport England. And the most up-to-date figures that are currently available are from 2023-24. Now, this tells us that according to the definition that they're now using, about 2/3 of people, of adults in England, are classed as active. So they are doing an average of 150 plus minutes a week, 2.5 hours a week. Now that the test for activity is quite moderate level activity. I'm semi-retired. I'm trying to do intensive activity now, and it's a different thing, but so we can claim to have 2/3 of the population being active, but I've already put a big red circle around the fact that 25% of the adult population in England is inactive, doing less than 30 minutes on average a week. And actually, when you look at the measures we've taken over the last 30 to 35 years, we haven't really improved activity levels at all in England. This counting system is a little bit a bit simplified now, and the definition of activity is walking, even just at normal walking pace. So we haven't really impacted the issue of having more people being more active more of the time. And as you see, we've got about 25% of our population that's inactive, and we haven't cracked this problem. I'm one of the guilty ones. I've been trying to do this for over 35 years. And sometimes I've just about managed to keep myself active, never mind other people. So, we still have tough problems to crack here. This is a very detailed slide, but it's really interesting because it shows the differences within different groups in society. It shows interesting things like, I think the most important one probably is socioeconomic groups.
Yeah.
So box number 2 there. In the UK, we use particular categorizations to decide which social or socioeconomic group a person is from. If you're in groups 1 and 2, that means that you're in the wealthiest tiers of society. And then the higher numbers are the people in lower socioeconomic status. And you wouldn't be surprised at all to see that the wealthiest in society, 73% of them are physically active. And when we get down to the poorest in society, only 52%. Now and that is represented in mortality rates, you know, within those groups as well. Life expectancy is much higher in the higher socioeconomic groups. Now, I spent 9 years in a municipality and 25 years in a university trying to figure out ways of dealing with these problems, trying to work with people who are the least well off in society and helping them to get the benefits of physical activity. And it links back to what I was talking about earlier, because in theory, if somebody is being active in sport, physical activity, they're meeting other people, they're being active socially in the community, they can potentially learn skills, develop confidence, leadership, and so on, that might help them to actually move out of that lower socioeconomic group at some point in time. But the problems that they have, the problems of being poor, are such that you can't turn your mind to physical activity when, you know, you might have to work 2 or 3 jobs to support your family. So these are really tough problems, and we can't imagine that, you know, we need the solutions to them are not just something that's at our fingertips. If the solutions were easy, we would have solved these problems by now. You can also see in the UK, and I don't know what the situation is like in Lithuania, look at the box number 3, where when you get to the age of 75 and older, your physical activity participation disappears off a cliff. I know why this is in England and in the UK to a large extent, because we tell older people that they need to sit down and not stress themselves. We actually have a national story that you slow down when you get older. And all of the evidence, all of the data that we have now tells us that once you get into your 40s, 50s and beyond, you have to be doing muscle strengthening exercises and you know, just doing weight training and other forms of exercise to give you a better chance at having a happy old age. And yet families, friends tell people as they get older, you take it easy. That's the classic thing that we do in the UK. I don't know what it's like in Lithuania, whether the situation is similar. And finally, I guess I will just pick out from this slide, disability and long-term health conditions. And again, I think this is partly something to do with the way that people, that activity is counted. Only 48% of adults with a disability or long-term health condition are active, whereas 69% of the general population is said to be active. I actually think if we interrogated those figures, we would see that the levels of activity among some disabled people are quite small, and it's quite minor activity. And again, people are being told, you're in a wheelchair, just take it easy, you know, you can't get into that building, don't do that activity. You're deaf, you know, you can't play that team sport because how are you going to join in? It's easier for us to tell these stories and to talk in this way than it is to actually tackle the issues. So this is just in England. I don't know what the numbers are like in Lithuania, but certainly that's a little taste of the challenges that we still face after 30, 40, 50, 60 years of having national level agencies trying to get the population to be more active.
Yeah, so this is a big issue, how to rise the percentage of population to be more active, but this is a difficult task. It looks that we could do it in a quick way with some, you know, tools, but this is something what we have to put proper resources on, and probably it's not only an issue about resources, it's about mentality, about you know, traditions and many other, you know, new developments which are around, especially youth and all other population, you know.
Yeah, I used a phrase in the first part of the presentation, which was looking at root causes, the underlying causes of, you know, we were talking about some of the inequalities in society and so on. I think it's very clear that physical activity participation levels are linked to inequalities, and therefore we need to understand the root causes of those inequalities in order to be able to tackle them. So I talk about disability as a form of discrimination. So disability is not a thing that you have. You know, we think about it, we medicalize it, we think about it as a medical condition that is owned by an individual. But actually, lots and lots of campaigners and academics in the last 5 decades have taught me to understand disability as a form of discrimination, that a person attains fewer opportunities in society because of an impairment that they happen to have. And that leads us probably closer to understanding the root causes of inactivity in disabled people, rather than just saying, well, that person uses a wheelchair, that person is visually impaired, that person has cerebral palsy, because they can still be active. But society has to take steps to make sure that they can be active too. So understanding the root causes of these inequalities is the start point, really, to helping get Lithuania more physically active, to get the UK more physically active.
But here we need more, I think, investigation and more, discussion, debates, and agreements. What has to be done in order to reduce the level of those inequalities in the society? So again, it's a government or policy formations, as well as we, as a policy implementers, we have to have the dialogue, the consensus in order to not to create, but to find the proper measures and tools in a shortest possible period to solve those inequalities. But it's very easy to say, but
Yeah.
it's so
It's
difficult
very hard to do.
It's
We also have to have different expectations about what we mean by physical activity. What is meaningful physical activity to one person might be something very different to another, and we have to cater for all of those interests, which again is expensive and resource intensive. But if you want a physically active culture in Lithuania, then that leadership has to come from the top, but the resource has to follow it as well. And I'll just show you this statement from a report in England by Public Health England. So this is interesting because we do now have our health agencies much more visibly involved in the physical activity agenda than we ever used to. I actually was involved in the 1990s in starting one of the first physical activity prescription schemes, where a doctor would tell you to go and do some physical activity in a program rather than prescribing medicine. And it wasn't perfect, but it was starting to change the mindset of health practitioners. This statement here is talking about evidence for physical activity interventions. And it says, evidence suggests that many interventions exacerbate, which it means make worse, inequalities for communities with protected characteristics, which include age, ethnic origin, religious belief, and so on. So we actually design physical activity programs, install them in communities, but they exclude the people that we most need to include. So, and this is evidence from a public health body in the UK that has observed this phenomenon.
And why does it happen? Why?
I think partly because I know in the UK, our university population of young people who study physical activity and sport is quite traditional. It's quite white, and we have a very diverse community in the UK now, and it's quite middle class a lot of the time as well. Which means that although we can teach them really well in university, we can expose them to experiences and so on, they haven't lived the experiences of the people with, as it says here, the protected characteristics, the people who have a challenge. We need more of the people from those communities to be in charge of what happens in terms of physical activity. And then you get some incredible success stories. So in West Yorkshire, in Sheffield, which is in South Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. a program was funded where they found a woman in the local community. A lot of people of Somalian origin living in a particular area, and they found a woman who was a community organizer, just doing things voluntarily. And they said, what if we pay you a salary to encourage people to be physically active in this area? And because she had the language skills, the cultural knowledge, she made an incredible impact on that community. But you have to multiply that by thousands or millions, you know, to do that in every community. But that was one little piece of evidence that that kind of approach works really well.
And again, from bottom up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Finding the right person in the right place.
Yeah.
Having those abilities and skills to attract people and
because you have credibility, you have an understanding of life in that setting, so you can make all of your decisions and have all of your conversations with that authority, rather than somebody who's got good intentions but just doesn't understand.
In the late 90s, when I was in one of my first visit to UK and Wales, and that, you know, policy, exercise prescription, I have heard for the first time in my life. I didn't understand at all what does it mean. So general practitioner, the doctor, kai mes dabar turim šeimos gydytoją, it doesn't exist in Lithuania. So for me was GP, general practitioner, exercise prescription. I was like feeling me like I'm in a mood. I didn't understand at all. But later, you know, the understanding and our public health system in Lithuania has been changed, and now when 2-3 decades passed, I already started to understand what was the policy in UK behind, you know. But do you think it is written that it's somehow a lost?
It's not. That particular type of provision isn't lost. It's still
work.
My own partner, she is an occupational therapist.
Yeah.
And she refers people. She works with people with neurological problems.
Yeah.
And she refers them into physical activity. So the evidence is there that it's an intervention that works.
Yeah.
And having a health professional say to you, I think this is a good idea, has a lot of credibility with a lot of people. You know, that they will trust what the doctor or the occupational therapist or the physiotherapist says they need to do.
And this is what we already did or invented as a new issue in our public healthcare system, that the students at the universities for public health and doctors program, they have already a module about physical activity interventions. So this is a big achievement for us, as that exercise prescription, it becomes as a normal practice. But first of all, those students and future professionals, they should learn, you know, what is physical activity, what is an exercise prescription, and all those kind of things. So they have to be prepared for.
Yeah, I think if I was to kind of summarize everything that we've been talking about, Vilma, that I worked on a European project, which was looking at the skills needed to work in the sport for development or sport for change sector. And yes, we need people with technical knowledge and skills. You can't run physical activity programs if you can't do that safely and, you know, prescribe the right activities for people to be doing. But I think we need our next generation of practitioners to have a sociological imagination as well. We need people to be able to understand the root causes of inequalities in the communities that they're working within, the issues that people are facing just to survive in, you know, some very challenging circumstances, and to be able to tailor their provision around that. Because if you just go in thinking, I've got lots of great ideas, I'm a personal trainer, I know how to, you know, build muscle, I know how to show somebody good technique in the gym, that stuff can be meaningless to people who have sizable challenges in their lives. So a sociological imagination and maybe even a political imagination. And that's what, I've tried to instill in students I've worked with for 25 years, as well as the technical side of it, of being able to coach a sport or to be able to safely lead physical activity. That is one of the keys to solving some of those problems that we've talked about.
Yeah, this is something, not this one, but what you put on the table is a lot of issues for us to think about. And
we must never stop thinking.
No, never. Mindaugai, gal tu turi ką nors?
Oh, yes, it's really interesting. I have several questions. You mentioned about those local leaders. So they were approached by a municipality, or who approached those, let's say, local leaders, who also in the communities and spread it?
The example I gave in the Somali community in Sheffield was it was actually funded by the Active Partnership. So that's that kind of third tier, if you like, of organisation that works usually strategically. In this case, they were working very operationally because they funded a programme within a community. But the municipality would have been involved as well, because the Active Partnerships work with a collection of municipalities in their area. So, for example, I worked in Leeds. Leeds is part of an area called West Yorkshire. So the Active Partnership in that area would work with Leeds, Bradford, Wakefield and the other municipalities in that area, coordinating the work that was being done. So it's quite confusing.
Okay, but this is Active Partnership. This is NGO sector. This is what kind of the
it's
structure.
Status, let's say.
It's kind of an NGO. It's Sport England, we call a quango, a quasi-autonomous NGO. It means that it's kind of independent from government, but it also isn't, because it receives its funding directly from government. Then it's meant to act independently, but there's always government looking over its shoulder. And the next level down is the Active Partnerships, who receive funding from Sport England. So it's the same kind of thing. They're kind of autonomous and independent in their own regions, but they have to prove all the time that they're spending public funding appropriately.
Why I'm asking, because as you mentioned, I mean, we need to reach the ones who need the most, let's say, physical activity, and sometimes we need to find them, and then you need to be flexible to do that.
Sure.
If you are a state's authority, sometimes you don't have this flexibility to choose, let's say, to choose the leader and say, okay, we see that this is the biggest beneficial to invest in this area. So it's interesting from this structural point of view how it's to remain flexible and to have the freedom to support some initiatives which can be very good. So that's why I'm asking.
No, it's a really good question. The problem is the lack of resources with the municipalities.
Yeah.
So when I was working in the 1990s and even into the 2000s, most local authorities, most municipalities in England had a sport development department. I worked in a team, the population of my town is about 140,000 people. We had a team of about 15 full-time sport development practitioners at one point. Now there are maybe 2. So that's the size of the challenge. The municipalities are really well positioned because they know all of the local issues, the geography, the facilities, all of the sports clubs in the area that you can partner with. But the municipalities have lost a lot of that resource. So now you're trying to find a different way to do the same kind of work at local level. And it's not easy anymore.
Okay, so yeah, I see it's already 1 hour past, but do we have some from the audience, but we have questions which have been sent to us. Could you open just a couple of them, because the first one, Monica, she, okay. Okay, probably about, the question about physical activity in a preschool or at school. Okay, so how government, how government should solve the issue to, strengthening the participation of school children or preschool children in a physical activity.
Okay, first of all, to say to everybody that this isn't my area of expertise, but it's something that I have dealt with quite a lot down the years. I think that, so in the UK, we have standard assessment tests that primary school children have to do at the age of 7 and at the age of 11. And my kids, who are now both in their early 20s, went through that. And it means that there is a huge emphasis in the national curriculum on literacy and numeracy at the expense of certain other subjects. And so that obviously it's important that kids can write and read and that they can work with numbers and so on. My view is that you can do that more imaginatively, and you can do that through physical activity to a much greater extent. And some of the best practice that I've seen in the UK is where learning about numbers, colours, counting, whatever, is integrated into a physical activity offer. Because you can do anything with physical activity. That is the power of this. You can be creative, and you can do anything with movement. Some of the better schools have the kids spending a lot of time outdoors, even if the weather is bad, because that's life. I read something recently. There's evidence that if they did a study in Finland with allowing kids to get really dirty, and actually the microbes that they were picking up by just playing like young kids do, it was a better balance for their health. So to my mind, one of the answers lies in having a physical activity culture which is embedded in everything you do in school from a very young age. Not that you have a PE lesson, a physical education lesson that takes place at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, but that you have movement built into everything. And you use movement as a tool for learning, the numeracy, the literacy, and so on. I think in the UK, for sure, we've got that the wrong way around at the moment. And primary school teachers that I've spoken to, and even some of my own students that I've spoken to after they've worked in primary schools, have said how restricted the movement side of things is. And to me, that we need to turn that upside down.
Yeah, so we know across Europe, and we try to apply that concept of active schools. Yeah, so we need to create conditions and have those integrated subjects, in order to.
So in terms of loss of resources, again, there was a period in the United Kingdom where we had something called school sports partnerships, which were funded centrally.
School sports.
This was in the noughts, in the 2000s, and the government of the time decided that movement and physical activity, physical education should be given higher priority. They created networks of partnerships where one high school would act as a hub for a series of primary schools. And you had lots and lots of integrated activity taking place. You had expertise outside of just the regular PE department, additional motivators and activators in the schools. In 2010, when a new government was elected, that program was cut, and some of it was about personalities and old scores being settled. That was starting to show signs of developing that movement culture, and children were receiving 5 physical activity opportunities every week. Some of them were outside of school hours, but they were available for kids to go to. There was more PE being done within the curriculum, and it was being integrated into other subjects. But that's a matter of resourcing, and we lost that 15 years ago. And I don't think we're in as healthy a situation as we were at that time.
And there is no plans to come back to that?
No, not at the moment. I mean, there's just no money for anything at the moment. But yeah, that kind of thing. It's a cultural issue. It's an issue of, this is the identity and the ideology of the school. It's based around movement.
Yeah.
It's based around exposure to the outdoors. we can do the geography, we can do the history, we can do any subject you like integrated with movement.
Yeah, but from the one hand, well, the design of the design and the content of the curriculum, the requirements for the teachers, and being, creative all the time, and being a leader of doing or inventing new things is something, what should be very much motivated from inside, from the concrete particular teacher and the environment where he or she working by the supporting of the school principal and all, policies, educational policies across country.
But in the UK, the last year of primary school, which is a really important year when you're thinking about transitioning to high school and becoming a young adult, it should be exciting, it should be creative, but it's very focused on the standard assessment test. And it's not the fault of the teachers, that's what they have to do.
This is.
And some schools are very good at playing it down and allowing the kids still to just explore and learn through play and so on. But it's always there looming like the sun in the sky. It's shining down that you have to think about this test that the kids are doing later in the year.
7 years old and 11 years old. Yes.
Yeah.
And you provide, you arrange testing, you receive results. What's after? Some intervention.
It's just a way to judge the performance of the school. It's really used for that.
To judge the performance of the school.
Yeah, I mean, some of the data would be used to pass on to the high school to say, this child needs support with this. But you could do that anyway. You can identify those things anywhere. But the standard assessment test results are then collated nationally, and you can compare schools against each other. But every school is different.
For sure. Okay, so do we have to finalize? And but it's again about physical activity of the school kids. Give us if there is no any questions from all sides, give us please three I don't know, the brilliant advices how to improve physical activity in our country. You have no idea about the country, just give us universal advice. 3, what?
In any country.
Universal advice for any country in the world, just to improve the level of physical activity of the population, not trying, to deal with the age or social economic background or even inequalities. I really understand very fully, and I'm hearing from you and from Themis Kokolakakis and from others, researchers, that really we should be very much focused on inequalities. And we are in Lithuania, we are not. But this is a key what we have to take into consideration. But nevertheless, please, just what comes to your mind, because you are so big expertise, you're so big expert on those issues. 3 advices. What we should keep our eye and effort for the future.
I think it comes down to something we've talked about a lot today, which is that every community is individual.
Yeah, community-based.
And therefore it's understanding, I suppose this isn't a very academic way to put it, but understanding what is going on in that community.
Yeah.
So if it's about inequalities, what are the inequalities?
Yeah.
And being able to understand the underlying causes of them. Now, often in my job as a university lecturer, we talk about we'll refer back to capitalism as the cause of all of these ills in some ways, or neoliberalism, and get political about it. But there are inevitably inequalities that are being and challenges that are being experienced by people. So what are they?
Yeah.
And what are the underlying causes? Before we even start to think about what the physical activity format might be that we think is going to work, So that's taking a kind of overview of what's happening in a particular community. The next thing is obviously that we need to get into that community and start communicating with people. I think I was very guilty of this when I was younger. I just think having a good idea and thinking, yeah, we'll take this physical activity program to this area, and they will all come in great big numbers.
But
And they'll think it's brilliant, and then you wondered, scratching your head, thinking, why didn't that happen? So we have to have conversations with people, and that would help us to identify, like the example I gave of the Somali woman, individuals in the community who can be influential, who can help us to share messages, who can maybe start to learn to become facilitators themselves. And in doing that, we have created a visibility of physical activity which is meaningful to people. So I attend a couple of local sports facilities in my area where I do my training and so on. And it's a real mix of people, and I talk to them all the time, and their stories are all very different about how they ended up in this place. We have to understand those stories really before we can provide something meaningful in the community. And I suppose the third thing, which we haven't talked about really today, but it just is the logical endpoint, is that we keep talking, and our evaluation of our success. We often will just say, we'll run a physical activity program for 8 weeks. We'll try and get some kids aged 12 to 15 to come and take part. And we count the number of kids. And if we get 50, we think it's successful. And if we only get 25, we think it's failed. We can be much more creative and much more three-dimensional in our evaluation as well. So as well as asking questions at the start in order to design interventions and to work with the community to develop those interventions, we are evaluating qualitatively people's experience of being physically active, maybe for the first time in a long time. So we are getting a qualitative understanding as well as counting numbers, measuring muscle growth or whatever else we're doing. That qualitative understanding links back to that whole idea of the root causes of what's going on in the community and how we're addressing it. So I don't know if that's useful, but that was off the top of my head. And I am very tired. But there's some ideas that I hope will give people something to think about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being inspired that some issues what we are arranging here and implementing at the agency level together with the municipalities, but there are so many things what we have to talk about, to discuss about, to agree and try to to get some better vision for our future, and first of all in our community, in our communities. So communities-based approach or community-central approach should be really dominated. Thank you so much. Ačiū labai, kurie dar su mumis. Baigiame mes įrašą ir laukite kitos savaitės, kito mūsų lektoriaus artimiausiu metu. Ačiū labai ir sudie.